Imagine being told that the chains on your wrists were placed there not by greed, but by God's will. Imagine the Bible being read over your bowed head, not to set you free, but to convince you that your bondage was holy. For centuries, this was the reality for millions of enslaved men, women, and children, a reality where Christianity and colonial economics became intertwined, justifying one of the darkest systems in human history. Welcome to Sands of History, where we uncover the truths buried beneath the sands of time. If you enjoy deep historical storytelling that challenges what you think you know, please like, share, and subscribe. You can also help us continue our work by supporting us financially. Links are in the description below. The economics of souls and sugar when European empires expanded across Africa, the Americas, and Asia from the 15th to the 19th centuries, their colonial economies thrived on a single, brutal equation: cheap labor, global trade wealth. Christianity was not just the religion of the colonizers, it became a tool to stabilize, justify, and even sanctify this system. Plantations in the Caribbean churned out sugar. In the American South, it was cotton and tobacco. In Brazil, coffee. These products made empires rich, but they relied on an endless supply of enslaved African labor. The system was so vast that by the 18th century, the transatlantic slave trade had transported more than 12 million Africans to the Americas. Missionaries often accompanied colonists, and rather than condemning the slave system outright, many adapted their teachings to fit the economic reality. In 1667, the Virginia Assembly in colonial America passed a law stating, "Baptism doth not alter the condition of the person as to his bondage or freedom." This law was crucial. Some enslaved Africans believed that converting to Christianity might grant them liberty, but colonial authorities made it clear: your soul might belong to God, but your body still belonged to the master. Biblical justifications for bondage. To maintain the economic system, colonial elites leaned heavily on scripture. One of the most cited verses came from Ephesians 6:12. "Slaves, obey your earthly masters with fear and trembling, in singleness of heart, as you obey Christ." This verse, plucked from its ancient context, was preached in plantations and colonial churches as divine confirmation of slavery's legitimacy. Clergymen argued that slavery was part of God's natural order. In 1740, Anglican missionary George Whitefield, later celebrated as a Great Awakening preacher, wrote, "It is plain to a demonstration that hot countries cannot be cultivated without Negroes." Here, religion was no longer just a moral compass, it had become economic reasoning wrapped in divine approval. The missionaries' role in the marketplace. It would be wrong to say all missionaries supported slavery. Some indeed condemned it. But in many colonies, missionaries worked hand in hand with planters, teaching slaves obedience while discouraging rebellion. Christian instruction often emphasized humility, submission, and the promise of a better life in heaven, rather than freedom on earth. On a Jamaican plantation in the 1820s, a missionary's Sunday sermon might go something like this: "Children, serve your masters with all your heart, for in serving them, you serve the Lord." Economically, this religious messaging kept the wheels of empire turning. A docile enslaved population meant fewer revolts, fewer economic disruptions, and more predictable profits. The church as slaveholder. One of the most disturbing truths of this era is that Christian churches themselves were sometimes direct beneficiaries of slavery. In the Americas, both Catholic and Protestant institutions owned plantations, rented out enslaved labor, and received donations derived from the slave economy. The Society of Jesus the Jesuits ran large plantations in the Americas. In Maryland, Jesuit priests owned hundreds of enslaved African Americans. In 1838, facing financial trouble, the Maryland Jesuits sold 272 enslaved men, women, and children to Louisiana plantations to pay off debts and keep their Georgetown College, now Georgetown University, afloat. The bill of sale recorded no moral hesitation, only financial transaction. Economics over evangelism. For colonial powers, slavery wasn't just about cheap labor. It was about control. Christianity offered a framework for that control. Mission schools taught enslaved children not literacy for liberation, but literacy for obedience, reading scripture in a way that reinforced colonial hierarchies. This fusion of faith and economics wasn't accidental, it was strategic. Colonial administrators often funded missionary activity because it civilized and pacified local populations. A British colonial report from the 19th century in Africa noted, "The introduction of Christian principles into the native mind will ensure their continued loyalty and subordination." This wasn't just about saving souls, it was about protecting profits, abolition, and the moral economy. By the late 18th and early 19th centuries, a wave of abolitionist movements began to challenge the moral legitimacy of slavery. Many were driven by religious convictions. Quakers, evangelical reformers, and others argued that slavery was incompatible with the teachings of Christ. In Britain, the evangelical MP William Wilberforce declared before Parliament, "So enormous, so dreadful, so irremediable did the trade's wickedness appear, that my own mind was completely made up for abolition." The economic tide was also shifting. Industrialization offered new forms of labor, and the profitability of slavery began to decline in certain regions. But make no mistake, moral outrage alone did not topple slavery. It was the convergence of moral, political, and economic pressures. The long shadow. Even after legal abolition, the marriage between Christianity and economic exploitation didn't dissolve overnight. Systems like sharecropping, debt peonage, and indentured labor carried forward the same logic: control labor through moral and social structures that claim divine approval. In colonial Africa and Asia, missionary schools continued to produce a class of Christianized locals, often better integrated into the colonial economic system than into their own pre-colonial cultural frameworks. The legacy we live with today, the legacy of this union between Christianity, slavery, and colonial economics still shapes societies. Churches in Europe and the Americas wrestle with their historical complicity. Some, like the Church of England, have issued formal apologies. Others have created reparations funds. Yet for millions of descendants of the enslaved, the memory remains raw. A reminder that the cross and the coin were once carried in the same hand. Christianity, slavery, and colonial economics were never just parallel forces. They were intertwined threads in the fabric of empire. Religion was not merely a spiritual refuge, it was often an economic weapon. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to Sands of History for more deep dives into the past. And if you'd like to help us continue uncovering and sharing these stories, please consider supporting us financially. Links are in the description below. Because history is not just about what happened, it's about the truths we choose to remember.